Welcome to this eLearn security training lesson video on Nessus. In this video, we will see how we can use Nessus in order to scan a host for potential vulnerabilities. Nessus is a vulnerability assessment tool that allows penetration testers and security researchers to find vulnerabilities affecting operating systems, websites, mobile phones, servers, and much more. In order to start using Nessus, we can open the web interface by browsing the local host address on port 8834. Here, we have to log into the system providing the credentials set on the first run. Right after we log in, we will see the Nessus homepage. The two main areas that we can navigate from here are scans and policies. In the scan area, we can create, start, and inspect security scans. In the policies area, we can create and edit all the Nessus policies we want. A policy is a set of configuration options related to performing a vulnerability scan. In the policy, we will be able to set timeouts, number of hosts, type of port scan, service detection configurations, credentials to use, plugin specifications, and much more. In order to start using Nessus, we will first create a new policy, and then we will use it to start our vulnerability scan. So, let us open the Policies area and click on New Policy. Here, a page with all the available scanning templates is displayed. As we can see, Nessus already offers some default templates. These templates are already configured for specific scans, such as Bash Shell Shock, Host Discovery, Web Application, and so on. For the purposes of this video, we will select the Advanced Scan, since this allows us to configure all the options and plugins we want. In the new page, we can start our configuration process. On the left, we have the main configurations area, while on the top, we can select between settings, credentials, compliance, and plugins policy libraries. The settings area allows us to configure all the general settings for the new template scan. Credentials scan can be used to add specific credentials to use once Nessus runs the scan. This may be useful if we want Nessus to log into the remote systems and scan applications, services, databases, web applications, restricted areas, and so on. The compliance area contains audit configuration that can be run against specific services, appliances, and more. The plugins library allows us to manually enable or disable the plugins that Nessus will use during the scan. Notice that each plugin is a simple program that checks for a given flaw. Let's now go back to Settings and start configuring the main policy options. The first step here is to select a name for our scan and a description. We will call this scan First Vulnerability Scan. Let's continue to configure our policy template. We will not inspect the permission settings since this area can be used to assign the policy to different users. Let's instead move into the Discovery section. In the Host Discovery subtree, we can configure how Nessus should detect live hosts in the network. The most basic test that Nessus will run is a ping against the target addresses we will provide. We can enable or disable it by simply clicking on the green button on the top. As we can see, if enabled, Nessus allows us to set what type of ping to run. If we scroll down, we can see a few other host discovery options. For example, we can enable to scan network printers. We can use the wake on LAN protocol, but also select the network type. As these options fit our needs, we will leave them as they are. The next subcategory to configure is port scanning. Here, we can configure how to identify open and closed ports, but also the port range to scan. Moreover, we can also see the local port enumerators. Port enumerators are actually port scanners that enumerate ports via credentialed checks. This is an extremely useful feature when dealing with firewalls. Finally, in the network port scanning, we can choose 3 different types of scans. The last subcategory is service discovery. Here we have a few settings for the services identification running on the target's ports. The first option tells Nessus to map all services on the discovered open ports. The second option allows us to scan for SSL and TLS services. For our tests, we will disable this option since it's not needed. Now that the discovery options are set, let's now move to the assessment area. In the general subcategory, we can set the accuracy option, which allows for granular control of false alarm reports, and also executes thorough tests during the scan. For the scope of this video, we will not enable this option. The antivirus option instructs Nessus to check if the target antivirus definitions are up to date. Finally, we can set the specific options to test SMTP services running on the scanned devices. The next subcategory is brute force. Here, we can set word lists to use, accounts name, retries, and so on. As brute forcing might be time-consuming, we will enable only the default settings. Notice that the default settings instruct Nessus to use only the credentials that we provide, or try for empty passwords, and so on. After brute forcing, we can see the web application menu. Although we already know that there are no web applications in our target network, we can see that this section allows us to configure options such as the user agent to use, how to crawl the web application, and what security tests to perform. At the end, in the Windows section, we can set some specific configurations for Windows operating system. For instance, with the default settings, it will query the machine's SMB domain and will try to enumerate domain users and local users. In the malware settings instead, we can provide a list of MD5 hashes of known malwares. Nessus will use these hashes to check if there is any match during the scan. In the report section, we can configure options regarding the Nessus report processing and output. Since this is not relevant for our tests, we will leave the default options and move to the Advanced tab. Here we can find settings that give us more control about the output and the scanning procedure. For example, we can instruct Nessus to randomly scan the IP addresses, but we can also set some performance options. For now, we will leave these options as they are. Once we've configured all the options in the settings library, we can move on and click on Credentials. As we already said, this tab allows us to set authentication credentials that Nessus will use during the scan. Here, for example, if we select Windows, we can select which authentication method to use and the corresponding information. Notice that, if we provide these credentials, Nessus will be able to scan the machine locally. This means that it will be able to scan installed application, search for known malwares, and so on. The next tab, Compliance, allows Nessus users to perform policy checks for specific applications, operating systems, network devices, hypervisors, and more. From this section, policy checks can be imported as files in order to perform the so-called Nessus policy compliance auditing. Again, as we are not targeting any specific application or OS, we can leave those options empty. The last category is plugins. This is one of the most interesting and important categories, as here we can select the plugins that Nessus should use. Notice that on the left we have the plugin family, while on the right we will see all the plugins that are in the family selected. For example, let's search the string mobile. By clicking on the mobile devices family on the right, we can see all the plugins for this family. Then, by clicking on a specific plugin, we can enable or disable it, but we can also retrieve further information. For this scan, let's disable all the plugins by clicking on Disable All, and let us enable only the Windows family. Now that we have a better understanding of Nessus policies, let's save everything and move to the Scan section. Notice that if everything is OK, we will see a pop-up in the top right corner. On the Scan section, we have to click on the New Scan button. This will list the available policies that we can use for our scan. As we've already created a policy based on advanced scanning, we will use this for now. Once selected, we will start configuring our scan option. The first thing to set is the name of the scan. Be sure to pick a meaningful name. Moreover, we can also give a brief description about it. For example, we can give the name of the company we are performing the scan for, the scope of the scan, a note from our engagement, and more. Finally, we have to type the target machines. The input here can be a single IP, a net block, or even a domain. Here, we insert a network range starting from 10.10.10.5 until 10.10.10.25. Before saving the scan, in the left menu, we can see two other options. In the Schedule section, we can instruct Nessus to run the scan on a specific time and date, while in the Notification section, we can tell Nessus to email the report of the scan once it's completed. Notice that to use this feature, we first have to configure an SMTP server. For now, we will not use these features, and we will just save the scan. In the Scan page, we can see the scan just created. Now we can run it by clicking on the launch icon on the right. At the Hosts area, we can see the scan has begun, and it started to collect information. We'll now forward the video in order to inspect the results of the scan. As we can see, the scan completes and we are now able to investigate the results. We can see that Nessus was able to find 2 hosts, for a total of 16 vulnerabilities. We can see from this chart that every host has at least 2 critical vulnerabilities, but also some high and medium vulnerabilities. For a better investigation, we can click on each host and view the vulnerability names and its description. On the top right side of the page, we can see some general information about the target machine, like the IP address, its MAC, operating system, and more. On the left, we have a list of the vulnerabilities found. By clicking on a specific vulnerability, we can see a description of the vulnerability, but also a possible fix. Notice that while reviewing the report from the web interface is very convenient, we can export it by clicking on the Export button on the top. As we've seen, Nessus is a powerful vulnerability scanner that offers great configurations features, but it also offers a very big list of vulnerability checks and plugins. We highly suggest you create your own policies and use them during your penetration tests. Make sure you disable plugins that you don't want to use, as this will make the scan finish faster. And this concludes our video training lesson on Nessus. Thanks for joining us.